October 1347. The exact moment everything changed forever. The moment when history itself pivoted on a single day, when the future became irreversibly and fundamentally different from the past, when a sequence of ordinary commercial transactions set in motion cascading events that would reshape the entire trajectory of European civilization for centuries to come. This is not hyperbole or dramatic exaggeration. This is historical fact grounded in meticulous research and documentation. Everything that followed in the next 300 years, the Renaissance that rediscovered classical learning and art, the Reformation that challenged religious authority, the rise of powerful nation-states and empires, the development of capitalism and modern banking systems, the expansion of European power and influence across the globe, the eventual emergence of the modern world itself. All of it was fundamentally shaped by what happened on this one single day in October 1347 in a Mediterranean harbor. One day. One moment. Everything changed. It was not supposed to end like this. The 12 Genoese merchant galleys cutting through the Mediterranean waters that autumn morning represented the absolute pinnacle of medieval commerce and international trade networks. These ships embodied the bleeding edge of global commerce, representing sophisticated trade routes that had taken centuries to establish and carefully refine. These were not mere merchant ships in any ordinary sense. They were floating repositories of wealth, of international connections, and of political and economic power. Their holds were crammed with luxurious silks from Constantinople dyed in brilliant purples and reds, with exotic spices from Alexandria and the Levantine ports including pepper, cinnamon, and clove, with precious gems from India including rubies, sapphires, and emeralds from the mines of the East, with luxury goods from the farthest reaches of the known world that could bring enormous wealth to whoever sold them in Europe. The merchants aboard these vessels were among the richest and most influential men in all of Europe. They had survived brutal wars, navigated treacherous political landscapes filled with betrayal and intrigue, built lasting dynasties through shrewd business acumen, careful financial calculation, and ruthless determination. They understood the mechanics of commerce better than anyone of their generation, understood the complexities of logistics across continents and seas, understood how to extract maximum profit from the vast spaces and trading networks between East and West. These were men of power, men of consequence, men who understood the world and how to navigate its complexities. But on this particular morning in October 1347, these powerful men and their crew carried something aboard their ships that no amount of wealth could purchase immunity from, no political connection could shield them against, no merchant acumen or business experience could protect them from. They carried death itself. Not metaphorically, not symbolically. Literally. They carried Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that would come to be known as the Black Death, sealed inside the living bodies of infected rats and nestled within the digestive systems of fleas that had fed on those rats' blood. They carried the living vector of the most devastating pandemic the old world had ever experienced. They were bringing the end of an era without knowing it, without any comprehension of what they were doing. They were carrying the instrument of the medieval world's destruction in their cargo holds. The catastrophic journey to this horrific moment had begun weeks earlier in Kaffa, a Genoese trading post located on the northern coast of the Black Sea in Crimea. Kaffa was far removed from the major European cities, far from the centers of power and commerce that defined medieval life for most Europeans living in Italy and France. Yet it was strategically crucial to the entire Genoese trading network and to the survival of Genoese commercial interests in the Far East and Central Asia. Controlling Kaffa meant controlling a vital link in the overland and maritime trade routes that connected the Asian continent to Europe through multiple intermediaries and trading hubs. Kaffa was where goods traveling the legendary Silk Road met the Mediterranean sea lanes. It was where merchants from the Levant and local rulers could exchange Eastern luxuries for European goods and precious metals. It was a critical node in a vast network of commerce, connection, and wealth exchange that spanned continents and connected civilizations that would otherwise never have encountered each other. Kaffa represented centuries of accumulated merchant knowledge and trading relationships built through careful diplomacy. The city had been built through generations of careful commercial expansion and political negotiation with local rulers and the Khan. Genoese merchants had invested enormous resources in establishing this outpost through trade and sometimes through force. They had paid tributes to local rulers, negotiated treaties and trading privileges, established customs houses and warehouses. The city housed warehouses full of goods waiting to be shipped back to Europe or further east. It was a thriving center of commerce and profit where merchants could become extraordinarily wealthy. But Kaffa was also a frontier city, vulnerable and exposed to the political upheavals and military conflicts that characterized the eastern Mediterranean in the 14th century. In 1347, Kaffa faced a siege from the armies of the Golden Horde under Khan leadership. The Khan's military forces surrounded the city, cutting off all supplies, isolating it completely from the outside world and from any hope of external assistance or relief. The siege was brutal and comprehensive. Every route in and out was controlled by Mongol cavalry. Every trading connection was severed. Every escape route was blocked. For the merchant community trapped inside the city, the siege represented an existential threat to their entire commercial enterprise and their survival. Trade was impossible under siege conditions. Supplies dwindled steadily day by day. Fresh water became increasingly scarce as the city's wells ran low. Food stores depleted rapidly as consumption continued, but no new supplies arrived. The situation grew increasingly desperate with each passing day and week, with no end in sight. Desperation gripped the city as starvation loomed. Then something unexpected and terrifying happened that no one could have anticipated. Something that medieval observers would struggle desperately to explain with their existing frameworks of medical understanding and knowledge. Something that would shake the foundations of their worldview and their understanding of disease. People in the besieged city began to fall ill with a strange and terrifying sickness that had never been documented or recorded in Europe or in European medical texts and traditions. The illness started with a fever, intense, burning heat that left victims delirious and completely unable to function or care for themselves. Within a day or two of the initial fever, dark swellings appeared in the groin, under the arms, and in the neck. These swellings, the buboes, as they would come to be known in later medical terminology, oozed blood and pus continuously, spreading infection and horrible stench. The victims suffered from terrible pain, from gangrene in their extremities turning black and dying, from bleeding from the nose and mouth. Death usually followed within days of the first symptoms appearing, sometimes within 24 hours of the fever's onset. The medieval physicians in Kaffa had absolutely no concept of what was causing this plague or this sickness that killed so rapidly. Their entire medical education was based on theories inherited from Greek and Roman sources that had been passed down for centuries, theories that had absolutely no applicability to bacterial infection transmitted by flea vectors. They believed that disease was caused by imbalances in the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. They believed that illness could be cured through bloodletting to balance the humors, through leeches to draw out evil, through carefully calibrated diets based on humoral theory. Some physicians thought that the plague might be caused by miasma, bad air, rising from swamps or from the decomposing bodies of the dead. Others suggested that it might be related to astrological influences, to the alignment of planets in the heavens, to the conjunction of heavenly bodies and their supposed effects on human health. Some blamed moral failings of the population and divine punishment for sins. None of these theories could explain what they were witnessing or why their treatments failed so completely. None of these explanations could stop the diseases spread through the city with relentless efficiency. None of these treatments could save the victims or even ease their suffering one bit. The plague spread through the city with apocalyptic efficiency and terrifying speed that seemed to accelerate each day. People woke with fever in the morning and were dead by evening. Entire families were wiped out in a matter of days. The normal structures of society, established burial customs, religious observances, family networks, and social ties, were overwhelmed by the sheer volume of death. The city's cemeteries filled to capacity within weeks. Mass graves were dug outside the city. Still, the bodies accumulated faster than they could possibly be buried. The streets began to fill with corpses as burying grounds were exhausted. The stench of death filled every quarter of the city, making it difficult to breathe or eat. The social fabric collapsed completely. The merchants trapped in Kaffa faced an impossible and heartbreaking situation with no good options available to them. Staying in the city during the siege meant risking death from multiple causes: starvation from the blockade, military assault by the besieging forces, or from the mysterious plague that was killing indiscriminately throughout the population without distinction between rich and poor. Attempting to flee meant risking the dangers of a sea voyage back to Europe, a voyage that typically took 3 weeks and faced significant navigational hazards from autumn storms and unpredictable Mediterranean weather. But many of the merchant crew were already showing signs of the plague. The first symptoms had appeared several weeks into the siege: fever, the distinctive buboes, the bleeding, the rapid descent into death and beyond. Hope was fading fast as more and more crew members fell ill daily. Despite these horrific circumstances, despite knowing that plague was actively spreading through their crew daily, despite the terrible knowledge that many of them were already infected and would likely not survive the journey back to Europe, the merchants made their decision. They would attempt the voyage. If they were going to die anyway, they reasoned, they would die trying to reach home. They would die attempting to warn their families and business partners. They would die trying to salvage something from this commercial venture that had gone so terribly wrong. And they would bring their cargo, the silks, the spices, the luxury goods, the items that represented the substantial profit potential of their venture. Even facing plague, even knowing that many of their crew were dying, the logic of commerce continued to operate. The cargo had value. The goods had to reach Europe. These were merchants, and merchants did not abandon cargo. And so, in the early days of October 1347, somewhere between the 1st and the 10th of that month, the 12 Genoese merchant galleys set sail from Caffa. Their holds contained both luxury goods and something far more deadly than any cargo they had ever transported. In the grain supplies, in the cargo holds, in the dark bilges of the ships, plague-infected rats had nested themselves. Fleas carrying Yersinia pestis in their digestive systems crawled across these rats, feeding on their blood, waiting for opportunity to find human hosts. The bacteria was present in the holds, waiting, ready to spread to new human victims when opportunity presented itself. Death was literally packed in their cargo alongside the valuable goods. The voyage across the Mediterranean took approximately 22 days of sailing through autumn waters. 22 days of navigating by sun and stars, of dealing with the ordinary challenges of maritime travel in the 14th century. But these were not ordinary voyages in any way. During these 22 days, the plague continued to spread relentlessly through the ship's populations. The surviving crew watched helplessly as more colleagues fell ill each day. They observed the fever, the buboes, the rapid decline into death. Some tried desperately to nurse the sick. Others abandoned them, isolating themselves in hopes of avoiding contagion. But isolation was impossible on a merchant ship where dozens of men worked in close quarters, shared food and water, breathed the same recycled air in the hold. The disease spread inexorably with each day at sea. The captains and merchants aboard these galleys could see the pattern unfolding before their eyes daily. They could count the dead each morning. They could watch the disease progress through its predictable course in each victim. They had no understanding of transmission mechanisms, no knowledge of germ theory or bacterial infection, but they could clearly observe the correlation between contact with the sick and subsequent illness in other crew members. Some theorized about contagion, though their theories involved mystical properties and supernatural influences rather than any understanding of bacterial transmission. The reality was that they were watching plague spread through a confined population with horrifying efficiency. Death was their constant companion on the voyage. By the time the merchant ships approached the Italian coast in late October, perhaps a third of the original crews were dead or actively dying. The survivors faced another agonizing decision. Which port would they approach? If they admitted the plague aboard, would any port accept them? Would they be forced to remain at sea, quarantined indefinitely? Would they be attacked if they attempted to enter port? Rumors of the disaster at Caffa had already spread through European trading networks via messengers. Merchants, pilgrims, and travelers had carried word of the terrible plague in the east, of cities emptied in weeks, of catastrophic mortality. Everyone was afraid. The decision about where to land was made partly by necessity and partly by calculation. The ships made for Sicily first. The island's ports were geographically closer to Caffa than mainland Italy. The surviving merchants desperately needed to reach land before plague claimed everyone still alive aboard. Some still harbored hope that if they could reach port and recover ashore, they might salvage their situation. Hope was powerful, even facing overwhelming evidence. Perhaps some would survive. Perhaps they could still profit from this venture. When the Genoese merchant galleys arrived at Messina's harbor in late October 1347, they were met with immediate suspicion and horror. The harbor masters could see the condition of the crews immediately. They could see the infected men displaying the characteristic symptoms of plague, the fever, the delirium, the dark buboes that were unmistakable to anyone who had heard rumors from the east. They could count the bodies that needed disposal. They could observe the same pattern of illness reported from the Far East and Constantinople. The recognition was immediate and chilling. These ships carried plague. The reality was unmistakable and terrifying to those who understood the implications. This was catastrophe arriving at their doorstep. Messina's government faced a dilemma that would become tragically familiar to European authorities over the coming months and years. Accept the merchant ships and risk importing plague into the city, with catastrophic consequences. Or refuse the merchants, turn away the ships, and endure economic losses and political consequences from antagonizing powerful Genoese merchants. The merchants themselves argued passionately for acceptance. They were powerful men with connections throughout Europe. They suggested the plague might not spread, that it could be contained somehow. The decision to allow the ships to dock was made partly from economic considerations and partly from assumptions about disease that would prove catastrophically wrong. Some argued that the plague would remain confined to the harbor district. Others believed that proper isolation measures could contain the infection. The decision was partly inevitable. Some traders always slipped through restrictions, and complete quarantine was nearly impossible to maintain in a busy commercial port. The city's gates were opened. The ships were permitted to dock. History's path became fixed. October 1347. The exact moment everything changed forever.